Thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm Dirk Wood at IDW, but most importantly, I'm here with my man, the intrepid and amazing Mr. Scott Dunbier, Director of Special Projects, here at IDW. We're going to talk some artist editions and a few other things. So, Scott?
Thank you very much, Dirk. And Dirk is the Senior Vice President of something, I don't know, plus marketing guy and, all around good guy.
Oh, please.
And my partner in all the artist edition panels we do.
That's true. That is true, and I love doing it. So, Scott, speaking of artist editions, one great thing about this panel is that rather than us fumbling with files on our computers at our various places of business, they're going to be dropping in all sorts of fabulous art for everybody to look at as we go, right? So I'm just going to imagine doing Vanna White's. So look at this Dave Cockrum page. Can you believe it?
That's kind of how I'm looking at it too. Hey.
Right, exactly. So we'll be as surprised as anybody when we see all the amazing art that pops up later. But speaking of Dave Cockrum, I guess that's a place to start, right? That's happening as we speak.
That's
so right. That Dave, and I know there was, this is being taped, obviously, not to blow that out of the water, but as we speak, there's a limited edition. I think that's just might be close to sold out, right?
Yeah, last time I checked about an hour ago, there were 5 copies left. And next week, the regular edition will be out. And if you're a Dave Cockrum fan, this is the book for you. It's filled with pages from every issue from Dave's first run on the X-Men. There's a beautiful fold-out. One thing that I really love, there were 2 pencil pages from the never completed Giant Size X-Men #2. Tons of designs. Cockrum always did beautiful designs. There are great designs for Nightcrawler, for instance, which is a character he co-created. Sketches, tons of covers. The very first cover that Cockrum ever penciled and inked of the X-Men, because most of the early covers he inked himself, but over other pencilers. And that was the cover to Foom #10. That's the cover of the Artifact edition. It's a really cool book. If you like his work, you'll love this book.
But I know we're going to talk about a few other things. We want to talk about Micronauts, which is like so many people's holy grail, Micronauts has been out of print for what, 30 years at this point?
Yeah, more than 30 years.
I mean, so how did this book come about in terms of, everybody's been asking about us from Micronauts for years. Why don't you talk a little bit about the inception of this book from the get-go?
Well, there are a couple of things in play. One is there is one collector who is the king of Micronauts art. This guy has more than 100 pages of Michael Golden's Micronauts, which made the book possible. There were some legal entanglements for years, and finally, luckily, our friends at Hasbro and Marvel were able to figure things out, and we were able to do it. Which makes me happy and makes tons of fans happy.
Makes a lot of people happy. Yeah. Now this is an artist edition, right? It's not an artifact.
That's right. Because of this one collector having so many pages and then getting other pages, we actually have 6 complete issues with a couple of filler pages because there were some missing, but really there are 6 complete issues plus pages from every single issue that Golden worked on. And, a tremendous gallery section, covers, sketches, more.
Great. So so most discerning collectors of your books probably already know this, but the difference between an artifact and an artist edition, the artist edition is complete stories, of course. Because some of these things, we're in this case, obviously we're lucky enough that one guy had 100 pages of Micronauts to make. That isn't always the case. And so, Watchmen was, I thought, a good example of that, where it would have been impossible to track those issues down. And
actually, Dave Cockrum's X-Men book is an artifact edition.
Oh, okay.
So
great. Yeah. And then a portion for the Micronauts book, a portion of the profits do go to the care of Bill Mantlo, right? Which is really important, obviously. What else have we got cooking? You want to tell us anything about the EC Covers artist edition? I know that one's on tap, right?
Yeah, soon. It's almost done. The only holdup is waiting on another 10 or so covers. Like everyone else, we've been affected by the current health crisis. I expect to have it out before the end of the year. There are lots of great covers in it that have not been printed in previous books. Plus, actually, what's really cool is our friends at DC Comics and Warner Brothers have allowed us to use covers from the Mad artist edition we did about, I don't know, 5-6 years ago.
Who are some of your favorite cover artists from that era?
Yeah, I mean, Wally Wood might be my favorite comic artist of all time.
So I know we just released the new printing of the original Martini edition, right? But what can you tell us about The Last Call?
This is a book that I've wanted to do for a very long time. The second book, it's called Last Call, as Dirk said. It'll have the score and Slayground, the third and fourth of the Parker books that Darwin Cook adapted from Richard Stark, Donald Westlake's original stories. This is definitely an emotional book for me. Darwin and I were very close. Besides the two stories, there are more than 100 unpublished drawings in the book, scanned from the original art, of course. A roundtable discussion between myself and Ed Brubaker and Bruce Timm, talking about Parker, talking about Darwin, funny stories, funny moments. Ed also wrote a beautiful and touching news story that is illustrated by his partner on Criminal, Sean Phillips. It's a 17-page story. Ed really knocked it out of the park. He brought it big time, and so did Sean. And Abby Westlake, well, she loved the story, and if she didn't, we wouldn't be running it.
Right.
It's 17 pages. It's not a Parker story, but it is very much related to the Parker books. Sean Phillips, by the way, besides drawing the story, is also designing the book. He's a very talented artist, but also an incredibly talented designer. As I said, it's been pretty emotional for me, and I will leave it at that. But I'm very happy that this book is going to be coming.
Yep. Well, me too.
We are now going to move into a different portion. We're going to spend some time specifically talking about another artist edition that'll be coming out later this year. And we're bringing on half of the original art team, Mr. Scott Williams.
Will
There he
technology
is.
work? We shall see.
We'll
So
see.
far, so good, I think.
All right.
Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you coming on. Like I told you, I'm going to make you blush a little bit now. Scott Williams. Okay.
We can talk about anything you want. You don't have to talk about me.
Any good movies you've seen lately? Okay. So, I wanted to set the record straight on one thing. Inkers don't always get the credit they deserve. Believe me, I've heard Scott say that a million times. Anyway, but seriously,
It's my mantra.
Inkers don't always get the credit they deserve. But Scott, besides being Jim's inker, for the last 30 years, right? More. Scott Williams really, to my mind, created an entire school of inking. If you look at inking before Scott's work, and then 5-10 years later, there was a change. A lot of people coming up were influenced by your work, and I think that's really part of your legacy. Besides being really the preeminent inker on superhero comics for the last 30 years, again, in my mind, the fact that you did sort of create that entire style, is pretty impressive to me. So many different inkers came on that were, I feel, emulating you, and that's not a bad thing.
No, it's also not unusual. Everybody who's in this business, whether they are pencilers or inkers, writers, anyone on the creative side of things, we all sort of build upon those who came before us. So I looked at the artists that I admired and borrowed little bits and pieces of what they did. And at a given point, whether it was Punisher before X-Men or X-Men itself, those are pretty high profile books. So there was a lot of eyeballs on those books, whether it was from fandom or from other professionals. So it's not a huge surprise that there were other artists who would pick up on some of the things that we were doing and then would take it and run with it. Again, it's certainly time-honored tradition. It's what I did. It's what to some extent it's what Jim did. I mean, we can talk about this, but I think part of the reason that we gelled when we collaborated from a pretty early point is we were kind of coming from some of the same sources. So, for example, I know this because I can see it, but I also talked to him about it. Is we're both big Neil Adams fans and big John Byrne fans earlier on both their runs on X-Men. So we had that as sort of like a building block as far as the type of art that inspired us. So that was sort of a mutual sort of launch point that we were able to build upon. But then we were also looking at other people. We were looking at like Louis Portasio, who was part of the studio. We would borrow little bits and pieces, because of proximity. But we'd also borrow things from artists past and present. In fact, I know as far as like X-Men specific, let's talk about X-Men. X-Men specific, especially starting sort of what I considered the beginning of our run, the serious beginning of our run in X-Men 268. You're going to notice if you look at that versus some of the stuff that we did prior to that, you're going to see a pretty heavy Barry Windsor Smith vibe. And the reason is because not only was Barry one of our both huge influences of ours, but we had both been up to Marvel offices right about the time that Barry was doing his Weapon X, and we actually got to see the boards. We were both kind of blown away by it. If you look at some of the, especially from an inking standpoint, from a finish standpoint, if you look at some of those early issues of Uncanny X-Men that we did together, there's a ton of that Weapon X stuff. That the line work, the sort of the veneer. I mean, there's a lot of that, and so we're throwing all of our influences up against the wall and seeing what would stick.
So, who are some of your other real big influences? Yours specifically?
It's going to always be the people that I've worked with closely. So it's always going to be contemporaries, because you are around them and you're around their art, and it is. There's just no way that it doesn't sort of affect you profoundly. So obviously Jim and Wills, who were part of Homage Studios and then later Wildstorm for years. I mean, we influenced each other. Actually, Wills actually had a bigger impact on how Jim was drawing back then than I think people realize. It's still, it doesn't take anything away from Jim's artistry or his ability to take an influence and make it his own, but there was definitely a healthy competitive aspect to what Jim and Wills were doing, and myself included. We would all kind of borrow from each other. But then it was, kind of like I said before, the sort of the Neil Adams and John Byrne. I would try for Jack Kirby power when I would be drawing my own stuff, but there's only one Jack Kirby. So again, it was I think my artistic path is always just littered. It's basically a litany of failures. It's trying to implement and be influenced by other artists, failing miserably, and eventually kind of having to fall back to sort of whatever my baseline is. I think that's probably pretty typical of most artists.
Sure. Hey, so could you maybe talk a little bit about the way you and Jim got together, and also how Homage Studios started?
Sure. Again, talking about Jim and Wills was inking Jim on early issues of off a flight. And, it was, I think it's real interesting seeing someone's career in the first 5 or 6 years of their career. It's probably the most exciting time, because what you see is someone who has entered the field. They're just good enough to get work, but they've got a lot to learn. They're real rough around the edges. But what you see is
finding their way.
Yeah, yeah. And you see rapid and accelerating improvement month in and month out. I've always been kind of fascinated by that. And anyways, so Jim was kind of like an up-and-coming artist on Alpha Flight. Wills was inking him. There was the beginning of a mutual admiration thing going on there. At some point, Jim asked to have me ink a couple of issues of Punisher War Journal. Again, it seemed to be working out well. But honestly, when I was inking Jim on War Journal, that he was a good, solid artist, but would never have occurred to me that he was going to take things where he ended up taking it. At some point, we decided we're better as a group than we are individually. Could we combine forces geographically? So we're actually in the same place. Wilson and I were already in San Diego. We convinced Jim to come on down and form a studio. And actually, there weren't a lot of studios at the time. There were sort of romantic studios from the standpoint that you had the old studio, the real studio with Bernie and Jeff Jones and Barry Windsor Smith and Mike Kaluta, and that was always sort of like the be all end all. I still romanticize that to a large extent. Later find out that they rarely work in the same building at the same time. Maybe like fits and starts, but not a whole lot. Whereas what we were doing, we were definitely in the same building, picking each other's brains, working together. Again, understanding that we sort of filled each other's needs. We had two really high level pencilers. I could draw a little bit, but definitely my strength was inking, and it created a place where a lot of the work could be done in one studio. And then a little later on, we brought in Joe Chito. So now all of a sudden we had penciler, inker, color, and it just kind of evolved from there. But it's a lot more. It makes sense from a business standpoint too, because you can offer editorial and clients one-stop shopping, so to speak.
Scott, I've got a question for you. Just going back to what you said a couple minutes ago about, Scott.
Yeah,
a couple minutes ago, you said that when you started working with Jim, that you didn't, he was a perfectly good artist, but you didn't realize he'd become sort of what he became. Is there a moment you can pinpoint where you
actually there is
doing that?
I've told the story a bunch of times. We were getting a little bit later in the timeline. This is post Punisher, and it was an issue of X-Men, and it was the cover to X-Men 258, and it's a very specific cover that I remember, and it's got Wolverine fighting Mandarin, and that was at a point. Actually, this is before Jim joined us in San Diego to form the studio. He was living with his family in Italy at the time, and I would be getting pages FedEx to me, and he was continuing to get better. By the time he left Punisher and it started X-Men, it was getting good, and I was getting more and more excited. But then when that cover came in, there was something about it. He leveled up. There's no other real way to put it. And again, it's the kind of thing that you see with a lot of artists where. And I'll date myself. I'll go back to like old Barry. We talked about Barry Windsor Smith earlier. I'll go back to old Barry Windsor Smith, where he was on Conan for a year and a half, took like a 3-month sabbatical, took a break, came back, and it was almost like a different artist. The light bulb had gone off over his head.
Right.
And I'm not saying it was necessarily that abrupt with Jim specifically. I don't think he had taken any time off, but I think it was a turning the corner artistically standpoint, from an artistic standpoint. And I remember not only did he nail that cover to the point where I literally told him, all right, look, I want to work with you as long as you will have me. This stuff is so next level that I'm happy and open to working with other people, but I really want to make a point out of letting you know that I want to keep this thing going, because I see magic starting to happen here.
And obviously he felt the same way.
Right.
Yeah, but I think also as a pencil artist, he was probably oblivious. I'm sure he was very proud of that cover. I would be curious actually to ask him, like, was that a milestone cover for him? I think he was probably just putting out another quality piece. It was something that hit me and hit my eye to the point where that is next level stuff, and I want to be a part of that next level stuff. Now, if you'd asked me then that, 30 years later we're still together, no, I wouldn't have gone that far. But you're always thinking about your next gig, and you're always happy at the to be working on X-Men. Great lineage, great legacy. It was always a high water mark from a career standpoint. Nothing wrong with staying on that. And if I could stay on that with someone of Jim's caliber, why not? Is I actually have no idea how Jim didn't get in my face or in my ear and give me a hard time about what I was doing on his pencils, because I know that, again, what I was doing was perfectly fine. It was perfectly professional, but I was still figuring things out. We never got into it about what I was doing wrong. And I know he must have been going, God, what is he making those choices for? And especially when you are as familiar with your own work as any penciler is, and Jim is, and he's seeing like subtle alterations. I'm sure some of them were probably, delightful and maybe a happy surprise, but I'm sure there's a lot of stuff where I'm missing it. I'm not interpreting it in as an exact a way as probably he had in his mind. And it must have been frustrating from a creative standpoint to see that and to go,
I don't agree.
The good outweighed the bad. Let's put it that way. I know that the good outweighed the bad, but still.
Let me tell you why I don't agree.
Okay.
Because Jim has never had a problem giving his opinion on something. Right? And I have seen him talk about other inkers to me, or he has talked about other inkers to me, and I've seen him talk to other inkers, and I'm talking about good inkers whose work he likes, but I've seen him give, hey, next time do this, this, and this. On very rare occasion, I've seen him actually go back in and do some work on it himself.
Sure.
But I've never heard him say that about you, ever.
Yeah, I doubt it would have lasted 30 years if there was too much that drove him crazy.
No, but everybody does have times where you go, yeah, that's not quite what I was thinking. But I mean, especially,
and that goes back again. I do think the good outweighed the bad, but it's I always want to give him credit as far as that goes, because I think the temptation would be there to just be irate about interpretations that aren't going the right way, and to whatever extent that you let me get away with what I got away with, I'm grateful.
And now I'd like to introduce the legendary Jim Lee.
Legendary.
It's true. There aren't very many legends that are working.
Thanks, Scott. Equally legendary Scott Dunbier. So.
Maybe infamous. I'm not sure. Anyway, so Jim, thank you for joining us on this panel. We're doing the Jim Lee X-Men Artist Edition, which I'm very excited about. I'd like to ask you a little bit about how you actually broke into comics. I believe you were at a show and you showed some samples to someone.
Yeah, it was the months after I graduated college, which was like June of 1986. And by my junior year in college, I knew that this is what I wanted to pursue. So once I graduated, I started doing some samples, started mailing them in, no response, kept sending more. And eventually I heard back from Marvel and DC. They both sent me form letters, but actually Marvel's, I think, actually went into a little bit of detail what I need to work on. DC's was a form letter, but a handwritten note from Dick Giordano at the bottom saying, looks interesting, keep it up. So, even those negative notes with the positive elements of encouragement or things I could actually work on that were concrete made a big difference. And then I, went to, it was kind of, skipping around Europe that summer with a friend of mine, you know, celebrate graduating college. And so I didn't really start in earnest till I got back. You know, just continue to get, you know, correspondence in the mail, basically saying no. And I found a small comic shop in St. Louis where I lived at the time. And there were a couple people that had already broken in indie comics. One guy, Rick Burkett, was working at DC. And he really said, look, you gotta meet these editors in person. You know, they're cold-hearted bastards, and they'll never give you a shot. You got to look them in the eye. And so I had a couple of college roommates that were working on Wall Street after college, and so I saw an ad in a comic book for the biggest Comic-Con of the year. I didn't realize it was for that particular con organizer, so it wasn't a huge con, but it was the conventions at near Madison Square Garden at the Pennsylvania Hotel, right?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Fred Greenberg.
Yeah, but this one, maybe it was a Fred Greenberg show. Yeah, but so I went to the show. It was like in November, December, and I showed my samples to some creators, and finally met Archie Goodwin, an editor, just by happenstance. He looked at the portfolio, liked what he saw, and invited me into the Marvel offices on a Monday. This was like Saturday when he saw it, and you know, I went to the Marvel offices. He looked at it again, said it looks pretty much like how I remembered it, and then introduced me to Carl Potts, who was another editor at Marvel, who worked with a lot of upcoming new artists. And so Carl really kind of gave me my first tryout story, like a 6 or 7 page tryout story that they had in inventory, and you know, gave me feedback. And then he gave me a fill-in story for Alpha Flight. They liked that, and then they gave me another fill-in, and then after that they gave me the regular gig. And so that's kind of how I started, you know, my professional career.
Yeah, that's great. And then how did you get in touch and meet Wills Portasio and Scott Williams? Because
Yes, so
that was the format of, I mean, you guys had formed then at Studios.
Not just yet. So, you know, I broke into comics like I said, late '86. Got my first Alpha Flight assignment in like January '87. And the inker on the book was Wills Portasio, and you know, this is pre-internet, of course, many decades pre-internet, and so there was really my knowledge or connections in the industry extended to Carl and Archie Goodwin a little bit, and the people I met at the comic shop. That was pretty much it. So anyone and everyone was like in a super huge, you know, connection and an addition to sort of this small but growing family of people you knew in the comic book industry. And so since Wills was inking me, I wanted to make sure he did a good job. Didn't take too many liberties. But no, I was just calling him actually just to make a connection, introduce myself, and we hit it off. And you know, we had like a 2-hour or 3-hour phone conversation, I think, the first time we talked. And you know, so I thought we had like instant chemistry. Little did I know that Wills is just a chatty person, and he has 2 to 3 hour phone calls with everybody. So it was like no big deal. I thought it was special. But anyway, so we talked about you know, the work. We talked about his career. You know, I'm sure he talked about growing up in Hawaii and how he was friends with Scott Williams. And you know, he's like, hey, you should come to San Diego Comic-Con. Like, you can meet me and Scott. You know, we live in San Diego. I'd never been to a real Comic-Con. There was a small ARC Con, I think, in St. Louis, which is more of a fantasy science fiction convention I went to as like when I was like 16 or so. So I booked, and this is back in the day when anyone could go to San Diego Comic-Con on
Sure.
you know, on a, you know, drop of a notice, drop of a dime. And yeah, so I don't even know how I got, maybe he even hooked up the tickets for me. I don't know. I flew to San Diego, met Wills, met Scott. We all bunked in the same hotel room, I think off of Broadway downtown.
Sure.
And this was in the convention center off of Broadway, which is the old convention center. Yeah, it wasn't even in the news. That thing wasn't, I don't even know if it was built at that time. Anyway, it was in the basement of this convention center off Broadway. And that was my first Comic-Con, and we hit it off. You know, Scott, Wilson, and I, we love comics, and we love talking about art and comics. And I think out of that hang session, that first Comic-Con together, where we were basically drawing in Artist Alley all day, we'd get fast food and then go back to the hotel room and draw some more, and some fans that they knew from Hawaii would kind of come in and out of Comic Book Club. So it was kind of a social thing, and we draw till like 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and then go back to the Comic-Con and draw some more. So that was really, this is pre Hollywood parties, pre anything. And we were in hog heaven. We loved it. That was fantastic. Selling sketches for $15 a pop. They felt like kings, right? And so we hit it off, and so I made the decision then. At the time, I was living in Berkeley, California. I decided I was going to move down after I got married in '89, and to open up a studio with those two guys. We were big fans of. There's a book called The Studio, which right? It was Barry Windsor Smith, Michael Kaluta, Bernie Wrightson, and who am I missing? Those are fourth. Jeff Jones, right. And so it was this amazing book. It's out of print, but if there are any people out there listening now, if you can get a copy, it's amazing. It's super inspirational. It inspired us to band together, and we called ourselves Homage Studios based on, it was kind of a highfalutin art term. But it was really like, we knew we could never measure up to the great talents that these guys were, but it was inspirational that 4 people got together, decided to work together, and kind of pushed each other artistically and created some amazing pieces of art. And so that was kind of the hope, is that we would start working together, and through this community, we would inspire, motivate each other to produce the best work possible, and that we would learn from each other.
One thing I wanted to mention is, I talked to Scott Williams earlier, and I think he was obviously a very important part of the team, the whole process of doing the book. You guys really meshed so well. And I mentioned something to him, and I'll tell you now. You probably don't remember this, but
did he start to cry? Did he tear up? No. That's my ultimate goal, is to get Scott to reminisce about something and start breaking out in tears.
Well, I mentioned to him, you told me something back, before you started at Wildstorm, before you formed Wildstorm. And that is, you told me about it. And I said, oh, is Scott going to stay with you? Is he going to ink you? And I remember your response. You said, oh, yeah. I know where my bread's buttered. and it's true. You guys really, you guys have been together for more than 30 years now. And that's
I think Punisher War Journal number 4, I think, was the first issue he inked. It was like a fill-in ink job that he came in on just to help out a newbie. Honestly, like, his skills were so advanced at the time, and I think that's what I was referring to, is that there was so much that he was adding and visualizing my art in a way that I couldn't replicate on my own, right? Not having the hand-eye coordination or the motor skills to ink the way he did. And he just brought a gloss and texture and a line weight to everything. It was just gorgeous. And so to me, it was like, this is the look that I wanted even before I knew this existed, right? And so I think knowing that you have a partner that you can trust, and that you have more confidence in bringing your pencils to life than you can yourself, I mean, it's an amazing thing to have. So it was like, hey, I want to make sure he's happy with what we're doing. We could be a team, and but at the same time, I need to make sure that he's happy in the assignments we take on, and so it really kind of, I did think about him and his desire to want to ink my pencils, and so I wanted to pick projects that we were both excited about, and that we would have fun working on. And he was a huge X-Men fan himself, so that was a no-brainer. And but when we jump ship to go to Image and we're creating new characters, you don't have that emotional connection to it because it's all new. But at that point, we had worked together for a while, and he was willing to kind of take that jump with me, with us, the rest of the Image guys. So it was great having him on board, having that kind of continuity and that professionalism, and obviously his artistic ability was a huge factor in in my work being so embraced by the fans, and we're still working today. I mean, it's 30. I mean, I've been in the industry 31 years, so I think he's inked me for at least 28 of those years, maybe something like that, some crazy number.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And one thing I did want to mention also to anyone who's watching this panel and hasn't noticed or seen it, Jim, you've been doing some drawings for Comic Book Relief lately.
Yeah.
You've committed to doing 60. How many have you done so far?
48. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, these are drawings that you're doing, that you're penciling and inking and putting up for charity.
Yeah.
And I mean, the amount of money that's been raised is phenomenal. But I just want to point out that these drawings you're doing are like kind of on a new level, I think. I mean,
they're just different. They're just different.
No.
It's
the Bat Hound, Brainiac. They're you're really you're knocking it out of the park.
Thank you very much, Scott. I appreciate it. Yeah.
I'm not trying to embarrass you, but I really do that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, let me just share that was not the intent when I started. It was just to kind of do sketches, to do like 1 hour sketches, one a day. I could do it for 60 days. We'll make, hopefully $150,000, $200,000 at the top end for comic shops, that are struggling because of the pandemic. And a lot of things aligned to kind of make it a bigger deal. We partnered with BINC, book industry foundation that basically is a nonprofit that was already set up. So we had a system by which to disperse the money, which is huge. Took a lot of work off our shoulders. To social media made an impact. The first one I did, I was going to do a headshot, and then I said, it's the first one. I'll do a little nicer shot of Nightwing. I put it out there. People responded to in a way that's probably disproportionate to what I drew. And then the money that raised was higher than what I would have charged or what typically would go for it. So that was a little surprising. And then I realized there was an audience waiting because they were all like stuck at home, right? They had nothing else to do. And so this was a lot of people had messaged me privately. It was a thing that they look forward to every day because it was a new bit of art, and it was very different. Even though it's a DC character, you didn't know what you were going to get each day. And so it kind of built up, and people were going, best one yet. And whether it was true or not, I then felt like the competitive side, spirit inside me was like, well, I got it up. I can't slack. And so it just got crazier and crazier, and the sketches got more and more complicated. And I was spending like 4, 5, 6 hours a day. And this was one a day for the most part for a big chunk of it. And then, other real life things, the protests, it really kind of shut it down for a while. And so I'm back at it. I've got another 12 or 13 to do that I want to finish off. But, I think just in general this year has been so turbulent and unprecedented in all the different things going on. I feel like the whole world's on fire no matter where you look. And so, even on top of these sketches I'm doing for, comic book shops, we did something that to benefit Black Lives Matters, and I think there's just going to be more stuff that I'm going to do personally, not just this year but going forward. I think the responsibility and need for us to step up and help is something that is more important than ever before. And so in a weird way, this pandemic has kind of awakened this aspect within me. And so I'm happy to have done it. And the fact that the artwork has kind of evolved and been able to do kind of different things, and people are responding positively to those, it's fun. I honestly, as like the whole premise was whoever won will get to choose the next character. And I thought, it would be Batman, this, Batman, that. And there are a lot of Batman, but there are a lot of other obscure characters, from Lynx to Ace the Bat Hound, which I think is still the current highest bid, right? I think that broke 20 grand. Yeah, but 20 grand, it's amazing, right? And I remember reading that email from the guy going, you know, I'd love to see Ace the Bat Hound. I'm like, ooh, maybe I should email him back and say, look, we're trying to raise money for charity. So you might want to, you know, and I said, nah, you know what? This is the spirit of the competition, or the spirit of this whole fundraising campaign. I'll do his bidding. I'll do it. And then lo and behold, it killed it at an auction. And it was like, it blew me away. And I think it just, you know, the cool thing about it is that it did break expectations, not in terms of the work I did, not just the work I did and the style I would approach it, but also the response and what pieces would go for it. I would have as much fun watching the auctions going, wow, that was definitely different than what I expected, right? And then on top of it, so many of my artistic peers and people I looked up to have voluntarily just reached out to me and said, hey, this is cool. Can I be a part of this? And so it's been an additional kind of, I don't know, kind of new level of awesomeness, being able to interact with my peers and see the pieces, for example, like that Bill Sienkiewicz did, or Walt Simonson's got a piece of Thor and Beta Ray Bill that's just, I mean, it's amazing. I love it. And so many other contemporaries that have really stepped up and also raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. So at the end of the day, I think we're going to probably break 700 or 750 or some number like that, maybe a little higher, which will be pretty impressive, I think.
Ah, that's wonderful. It's amazing work and amazing cause that you put together.
No, thank you.
Anyway, Jim, I know you've got a busy schedule, so we're going to wrap this up. But I did want to ask you, so about the Jim Lee X-Men Artist Edition.
Sure.
So, how do you feel about a book like this? Are you happy to look back at old work, or are you you know, do you kind of dread that? Or I mean, I personally think the work looks great. I think it holds up really well. But you know, as the artist, how do you feel about it?
Yeah. Look, I think it was a product, or, you know, art of its times, right? And I say product because multiple people, it even has lettering on it, a lot of the pages, right? So it's me, Scott, and the letter, usually Orzechowski, right? Tom. So I look at it from that point of view. There's things I did that were stylistically in vogue at the time, you know, super long thighs, you know, thank you, Art Adams, you know, and giant, you know, glutes and lats, and that were all like double or triple lit from underneath. And thank you, Wolf Portasio, for that. So there's a lot, you know, Barry Windsor Smith. So there's a lot, you could see all the influences on my sleeve. And at that point, I kind of had synthesized all my influences into a style that I felt was like ownable. But the stuff I do now is different. And so the way I look at it is that was what I could do at the time. I'm happy with what it is, and I'm happy that the fans love it so much, you know. But would I have changed things? Absolutely. But I that's the artistic mentality, right? There's always things you want to change even after you've drawn it, and it's the next day, the day after, you know.
Sure.
So I think that's healthy, because that means that you're always looking to kind of figure out how to improve and fix what you've created. But that's not really the main thrust of it. The main thrust of it is I look at it and I have incredibly fond memories of creating the work, my love for the characters. That time was super exciting in my, you know, career. Sure. Everything was just kind of changing, evolving, growing really rapidly. And so it wasn't just the fact that I got to work on the X-Men, but it was really the ramp up in my career in terms of number of fans and the amount of you know, attention my work got. And so it represents a very distinct and hyper exciting period in my career, which is like the beginning. And I think that's probably the most exciting time of it for most people, which is the ramp up. And then after that, you know, where can you go, right? So it's cool to have all that stuff collected, and a lot of the art has been sold off over the years. I have some of it, but it's great to have it at that size and really with that kind of fidelity that you know, things that you created bring to the table, which is, it looks just like the original art, and be able to kind of have it in a handy, oversized book, and being able to see all the chicken scratch and margin notes and things, it brings back a lot of very fond memories.
Good. Well, Jim, thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you in person again sometime.
Yeah, someday.